Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Gosztola, co-host of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. I am waiting for this to catch up so I can go live at Rockfin, but for now, we are joined by my co-host, our lovely co-host, Rania Khalek. Hey Rania.
Hey Kevin.
And I'm not quite sure. Okay, now it gives me the option, and I think that's all I have to do, and we are live on multiple platforms. All right, so something we like to do periodically. This is particularly to show our appreciation for the subscribers. And we've got several on Rockfin now. We still have many loyal supporters over at our Patreon who will be getting access to this. But when we're done, we'll probably just archive this, and it'll only be available to those who have been chipping in for our show, something we do every few months as a way of thanking people for supporting us. So yeah, how are you? You made your way back to Beirut.
I did. I just got back here a few days ago, still adjusting to the time difference, which is always harder coming here than going there. But all in all, yeah, it's recovering from last week. Which was it's been a pretty crazy couple of weeks actually. With Gaza being bombed and just kind of Palestine under full-on assault. But now a ceasefire's gone into effect, and I'm actually really, I have to say it's been really inspiring seeing how many people want to learn about what's happening in Palestine, and people like really speaking out out against what Israel's doing in a way like I've never seen. So while it's been a really tragic couple of weeks, it's also been a really inspiring couple of weeks in that sense, and also just like the sort of general unity that you've seen among Palestinians that hasn't happened in a long time across the different sort of enclaves that Israel's broken them up into.
Yeah, I know that when we interviewed Asa, he had a little bit of a different reaction. I suggested that I thought there was kind of a shift, and I could feel like an undercurrent changing. You've noticed that there's some stories that the New York Times is even willing to publish right now, lines that you just wouldn't have seen 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, like I don't want to get too excited or and overly excite anyone. Like definitely there's not, even if there's a shift in popular opinion about this issue, which is what I think is actually happening, is a slight shift in popular opinion. It doesn't translate into a change in policy, but the shift in popular opinion is still important. And it is still unprecedented to see Palestine being spoken in a way where people are discussing, or you see on the pages of the New York Times, an acknowledgement of like the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians that's ongoing today, and that started in 1948. You saw that in a recent op-ed by Diana Buttu, sorry, who, why is it a tongue twister? Diana Buttu. Who is this, if anyone's not familiar with her or her name, her doesn't, she's a Canadian Palestinian lawyer who's from 48 Palestine, who used to be an advisor to the PLO. And she wrote this op-ed this week about like Israel's rightward. Did we lose Kevin? Oh no, I just assumed you took yourself off screen. I'm sorry.
There was an awkward shot of me, and I wanted to give you space to talk. And
it's actually, you know why I thought we lost. You know why I thought we lost you on like on a little bit of a different tangent. I've been using StreamYard to record my interviews, and I haven't been as savvy as you are, where you like put someone on screen by themselves. And so I assumed that I interviewed someone recently who kept dropping off and would disappear from the screen. So I just assumed that's what happened with you. But anyways, thank you for being so savvy, Kevin. But anyway, Diana Buttu wrote this piece for the New York Times, really talking about like the situation for Palestinian citizens of Israel, which doesn't get talked about often, right? Because the focus is typically on the horrors taking place in Gaza or in the West Bank. But as we've seen, and as we talked about in our last episode with Asa, is the situation for Palestinians in what's considered Israel proper, inside what's also called 48 Palestine, the people who were not ethnically cleansed in 1948, is also quite dire. They make up about 20% of Israel's population. And yeah, they have citizenship, but there's about 50 to 60 laws on the Israeli books that explicitly discriminate against non-Jews, which is essentially them. They can't build houses where they want. They're actually pretty often being pushed out of neighborhoods in different kinds of ethnic cleansing that's sort of done under the guise of gentrification and of Judaizing areas, kind of like what you see in the settlements, but a little bit of a different strategy. And anyway, so she lays this out in her New York Times op-ed, as well as talking about the Palestinian village that her father and his family were ethnically cleansed from in 1948, and how for the first 20 years of Israel's existence, Palestinian citizens of Israel were actually subjected to military rule, much in the same way that Palestinians in the West Bank are. And then Israel gave them citizenship to be able to give itself this sort of veneer of democracy. Oh, we have like a 20% population that's Palestinian and isn't even Jewish, and they have full rights, even though they don't really. So anyways, she spoke openly about this ethnic cleansing of her family and the situation of Israel's creation in the New York Times in pretty explicit terms. And so I don't want to get too excited because obviously the New York Times reporting is still very skewed. Everything is still focused on how Israel feels, how Israelis feel, Palestinian reactions to Israel's aggression, whether inside 48 Palestine or outside, is always portrayed as violent and angry and irrational. And that's still happening if you read their coverage. But they also did do this front page above the fold story, I think it was over the weekend, about what life is like for Palestinians in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. And I mean, it did not make Israel look good. So there's clearly some shift. The shift isn't huge. It maybe feels bigger to us because we're seeing certain things, excuse me, acknowledged that we haven't seen acknowledged before. And we're seeing certain faces and names maybe on TV and in mainstream publications that haven't been given a platform before to say the sort of things that about the reality of the situation. But I don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves because there's still a long road ahead. And we saw Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was just in Israel and Palestine. And he stood next to Netanyahu after the Israelis killed 66 children and wiped out 15 families in Gaza. And he said nothing about Palestinian safety and only acknowledged Israel's security repeatedly. So nothing has changed. U.S. policy remains exactly as it was before Gaza was being bombed. And there are no plans for that policy to shift whatsoever. So, I mean, it is good to get excited that the narrative may be shifting slightly, but we've also seen this backlash, right, from the Israel lobby with these kinds of fabricated narratives about, oh my God, Jews are under attack across America. I would point people to a really excellent piece Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone wrote, really debunking this latest narrative about, trying to divert attention away from Israel's horrific behavior to make it about the safety of American Jews as if they're under threat when they're not. And all of these stories about anti-Semitic attacks are actually completely bullshit. And are incidences that have one after another been provoked by pro-Israel protesters behaving really aggressively and violently towards pro-Palestinian protesters, and then videotaping pro-Palestine protesters reacting, and then the media just like following that line and saying, oh, look at this poor pro-Israel protester, they're attacking Jews, when that's not in fact what's happening at all. And trying to shift the narrative. Again, this happened in 2014, by the way, trying to shift the narrative away from Israel killing children in Gaza and Israeli Jewish extremist lynch mobs looking for Palestinian citizens of Israel to hunt down and lynch, change the narrative from that to Jewish safety, Jews under attack, I'm not safe to support Israel, as Bari Weiss claimed in recent days. She was like, oh my God, I'm hearing from like hairdressers and like school teachers and people's roommates, and they're like, oh my God, my friends and my clients don't want to work with somebody who's a supporter of Israel, who's a Zionist. Oh my God. And it's like, okay, well, good for them. Like, I'm sorry. It's people aren't obligated to be friends with or live with or work with business-wise racists. Like, if you're a racist, I don't really want much to do with you. And that's for me to decide. And like, if that's what's happening, then the problem is actually, maybe you should like reflect on your own racism and support for a racist country. But it's actually really been infuriating. Like, Palestinians are being hunted by extremists who have all the power. Children were being bombed. Children and families were being bombed in their beds in Gaza. Media was being attacked. The COVID clinic in Gaza, that is the only clinic that tests for COVID, was destroyed in an Israeli bombing. Healthcare workers were killed. Like one of Gaza's only neurosurgeons was killed in an Israeli airstrike on his family home. And you want to sit here and spin some narrative about you in the safety of America being the true victim of this? Like, no, absolutely not. It's the most privileged, disconnected, pathetic, elite narrative I've ever heard. Oh my God, I'm so scared in Manhattan because there's pro-Palestine protests. Like, yeah, try living in Palestine as a Palestinian and see how that works, and be under this like ethno-religious supremacist regime that is literally trying to erase you and is bombing you and shooting at you and hunting you down because of who you are, and then come back to me and complain about being scared to be a Zionist in America.
Yeah. And there was, just to add to that, there was this comedian, Amr Zar, who put this viral clip together, or he didn't plan on it probably to go as far as it went, but he basically said that nobody has an obligation to condemn anti-Semitic attacks. They can stay focused on the crimes, on the atrocities that we are seeing in Gaza and the West Bank and in Jerusalem by Israeli security and military forces. And that got translated into this, like, I have it in front of me. Basically, Jake Tapper was one offender, but not the only offender who
Jake
said
Tapper is so pro-Israel, by the way. He's like he likes to be Israel's lawyer on TV. Anyways, continue.
Is he trying to out Blitzer, Wolf Blitzer?
I think so. I think so.
He wants to be the patriarch when Wolf retires. Right. So he's trying to. So
that's the plan.
Anyways, he said this is from Saturday after numerous attacks of Jews being physically assaulted in the U.S. So not only is he suggesting that that person doesn't care about anti-Semitic attacks, but like that kind of rhetoric is fueling those attacks, specifically on those trying to make a cause and effect type of a relationship between this comedian saying in a clip, I think he's like sitting in his car, just going off into his iPhone or whatever his device is, and saying that you do not have an obligation to condemn. This is all a means of distraction, laying it out what the pro-Israel or the Israeli lobby tactic is. And then people like Jake Tapper, there were others. I mean, the pile-on was considerable. And I'll throw out there too, along with this, the really sad and pathetic clip that we got from Bernie Sanders of urging people to tone down the rhetoric when they're just, we're using terms like ethnic cleansing, apartheid, even genocide that are actually dictionary definitions of the ongoing developments and part of the status quo in the region. Like, it's not like This is hyperbole. And also, if you even claim to care about international law or international human rights law, there are people pointing specifically to UN documents that show we are not like just throwing this around to be crazy people. The
U.S. constantly does, by the way. Yeah. These same people will be like, it's a genocide in Syria, it's a genocide in Xinjiang. And like, they can't back it up with the actual definition of what that means. But in this case, the definitions apply like in so many ways. Anyway, sorry, continue. You were like,
well, and then there was really the sad disappointment continued with Mark Ruffalo's stupid apology that I'm not sure
he did the opposite of what the Hulk does. Like,
yeah. So the Israel lobby got the Hulk to Well, basically, he was afraid of showing his anger and rage over Israel. So it's like it's like his character in the movies. He's got to like do that thing that helps him not Hulk out because of what happens when he does so. He apologized so he wouldn't be caught hulking out against Israel. And I mean, in that sense, not a whole lot has changed. But I think the more important thing to observe here is, as we see this shift in popular opinion, and we're not certain how much of a shift it is, the most important reality that we confront is that you see, once again, when it comes to policy, our politics is just so miserably far behind. In fact, it's a regressive politics. In fact, within the legislative branch and the executive branch of our government, they can't even be responsive to those cultural shifts. They're just so...
Just like with Medicare for All.
Yeah,
like with universal health care. Like, the majority of the country supports universal health care, and we can't get it because we don't have an actual democratic system. We have a system that responds to this corporate like oligarchy, that this capitalist class that controls everything. And it's them who get to decide what happens. And they're also the imperialist class. And imperialism, American imperialism, needs Israel. Israel
because
serves,
we couldn't even get them to hold up an arms sale to
like the
Israel.
people try to make this argument. I just completely disagree with it. This argument that like that Israel is actually bad for American interests. Like some realists, right, try to make this argument. And I understand why that argument is attractive, because you'll have like Osama bin Laden citing the oppression of Palestinians, right, as like a grievance, even though it's like not his main grievance. He'll just cite it as like an excuse and to rally other Muslims, or how it makes American policy more difficult. But actually, it's the opposite. Look, Israel was created for a reason. A Jewish state was imposed on the Middle East for a reason. It was the first sectarian state imposed on the region. It's divide and conquer. It's not the only sectarian state the imperialists tried to impose on the region, by the way. They also wanted Lebanon to be a Christian state. You also had the US try to break up and balkanize Iraq into a Sunni state and a Shia state. Like, this is the dream of imperialism, is to break things up by ethnicity, to balkanize things, like they've managed to do in other parts of the world. And that's one reason why a Jewish state is so integral to American superiority in the region. But beyond that, it's useful as this minority state that does America's bidding. It's America's bulldog in the region against Iran, against the whole, like, anybody who opposes historically throughout the Cold War, and not just in the Middle East. Israel was actually allied with fascists across Latin America. They were hugely important in the fight against communism across Latin America and Asia, particularly Latin America, and in the Middle East as well. And the same goes for today. Like, Israel is relied on by the Americans to police the Middle East. That's what they do when they're bombing Hezbollah. That's what they do when they're bombing Syria. That's what they do in their aggression against Iran. They're assassinating nuclear scientists, and helping support the MEK and all of these other things that actually do propel American hegemony in the Middle East. So that can't be forgotten from this. It's not. That's why people need to understand it's not a matter of just convincing Americans that Israel is mean and racist, which it is, and it's good to change popular opinion on this. But more importantly, we need to attach this issue to the broader issue of U.S. and Western imperialism. And when we disconnect it, it actually makes it more difficult to end this disgusting apartheid occupation. I don't even think those words are actually go far enough in describing what Palestinians are subjected to. But whatever you want to call it, if we want to end it, we have to recognize it as part of a bigger system than just Israel-Palestine. Yeah.
It's like you were saying, and you put it very well in a previous episode, that it all goes back to imperialism, and that being that it being a crucial component of needing the Israeli state for the furtherance of empire. And then that's why it's not to excuse it, but then that's why you can't get a group of representatives or a handful of senators to challenge it, because if they were to, they're going to be pulled aside and someone's going to remind them of the crucial role of Israel. And, you see who doesn't leave the script. You see, it's really kind of fascinating too, to see who didn't get pushed off course at all. I was going through and putting together some stuff ahead of this show, and also just doing some other research. And Nancy Pelosi's message didn't change one bit at all. I don't know if you noticed that, but someone who didn't have any blow to her conscience at all over the last 2 to 3 weeks was Nancy Pelosi. So, all right. Well, it's been pretty crazy for me, but I'm working on moving to
that's not easy.
I'm working on moving in both a physical and cyberspace sense. My newsletter on whistleblowers, it's getting its own site. I fled Substack.
So what happened with Substack? I saw you mentioned.
Well, so what happened is, and I suppose I should tell you that I became convinced that part of the reason why I was treated like shit by their executives was because I never actually brought you in to be a Substack contributor. Because 3 or 4 years ago, the guy who runs it, his name's Hamish, actually, he pitched me cold. Nobody knew what Substack was at all. And he wanted us to do our podcast on Substack from Substack, in 2018. And I said, no, that's not really what I want to do, but I do run my own independent media site, and this could be useful. We'd like to have a newsletter. So I ended up running it from there. But, they see dollar signs behind everything, and they wanted to monetize your following. And
then why didn't they why didn't they why didn't they ever reach out to me? I never got a message from Substack.
It's a good question, but this is my theory, because it's the only way I can explain what happened, because at some point they decided to give up on helping me, because in the early stage, what they did was I told them that the way I had it set up on my own personal website, and this may not seem interesting to people who are following along, but this is actually really important for independent media. Okay, so everyone has different levels of income, and so at our site we have it set so that people can give whatever amount per month to support our journalism. But at Substack, what they decide to do is tell you that you can only give per month a certain amount and annually a certain amount. So that means if somebody wants to give more, I lose them. So I had talked to them and I said, set me up with some tiers. I want to be able to bring people over, get them to give it $5 a month, $15 a month, and $25 a month. And then, we can have even a higher rate per month. And they did that for me, even though they said that it was too complicated and they wouldn't do that for other people who were hosted on Substack. And then abruptly, a few months ago, let's say 6 or 7 months ago, I get this thing back from oh, we're not going to do that anymore. I'm sorry. And part of my problem was that this guy Hamish had duped me into asking people to pay $350 a year for an annual subscription to my newsletter, which I thought was ridiculous, because the way that for example, the Daily Poster does it is you get a deal. So if you're not giving $10 a month, then you choose to give to buy an annual subscription, you get it for $75. You're saving money by giving more, sort of. Right. You get an annual subscription for cheaper. It's actually how magazines have always worked. And somehow this guy was like, look, ask people for $350. I'm like, who's going to give me that? Well, actually, the very kind person that is Fidel Narvaez has actually donated $350 to me and became a subscriber. But then I lost him at that rate because I had to cancel it in order to put in the annual subscription at $75. And this all sounds like, I'm way in the weeds here, but it's actually really important because Substack's not giving me the flexibility as an independent journalist to bring in from we have a range of people who support our work. I have people at the bottom who are scraping by on a social security check and somehow still feel willing and obligated to give me like $5 every few months in order to support what I do. And I love them. They're amazing. And then there are people who are not under that kind of pressure and can send me a check in the mail for like $200. And that's fantastic. But Substack doesn't actually respect or acknowledge that there's people at all income levels that are there to support you. And all they're doing, and my critique against Substack isn't the one that you get from the resistance grifter crowd or the people who are upset. My critique is that they're so focused on monetizing personalities that it's actually undermining journalism.
Yeah, it's like part of that broader problem that we've talked about before on the show, which is like this idea of journalists having to become entertainers on top of doing journalism. Like you have to be able to entertain and be like a performer, and how that entire dynamic has really undermined journalism and media, because then there's people who are really talented investigative journalists, but maybe they just like aren't, comedians at the same time and can't entertain, and like that shouldn't be a part of the job. And yeah, it's like nice to, it's nice to be able to be someone who can do all those things, but that shouldn't be a qualification of like being able to succeed in an industry that's actually about holding the powerful accountable. Cause I'm not a comedian.
Yeah,
it's fine that some people are, but I'm not. And I don't want to have to perform and dance just so people see or get attention for this investigative article I wrote. Like it shouldn't be like that. And that goes back to the broader issue of the collapse of a funding mechanism for media, and why media needs to be treated like a public utility in so many ways. Because otherwise, everyone's just becoming dependent on either rich donors or, just having a really, really big personality they can monetize on either Substack or Patreon, or for a podcast. But if you can't do those things, where does that leave you? And it's just really sad. It's the death of the journalism industry. And on top of that, there's something else happening that's a part of this, which is, while it's becoming more and more difficult for the left to find ways to monetize, and it's actually the left that's having to really shift to and turn to this model of, I'm going to perform for you while I give you information so that you can pay me so I can also do the journalism. On the other hand, you have a situation where the left is having to go behind paywalls as a result, and liberal media is going behind paywalls as well. Well, at the same time, in parallel to that, you have these right-wing billionaires who are spending limitless amounts of funds funding these kind of spammy news-looking websites. And as a result, right-wing media is free. And then left-wing media needs to be paid for behind a paywall. And where does that leave us as a society? It's at a time when people are hungry for anti-establishment information. What are they going to do? Are they going to pay for the left stuff, or are they just going to consume the free right-wing stuff? It's like a recipe for disaster in terms of our politics.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so, the other thing I wanted to say before Dawn was that I'm working on launching this newsletter again that I've been doing on whistleblowers, and it's been a hub for updates on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And so I just wanted to let people know about that. I'm relaunching it next week at, sorry, I'm just looking over my shoulder at another screen. It's I look like I'm looking at a field or something. No.
You're envisioning the future away from Substack.
I'm keeping my head up. No, but I just do feel like, I really do feel like, because it didn't live up to its potential, and because they aren't invested in me to the extent of Matt Taibi, not to denigrate him. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to be I'm not jealous of him. I'm not saying that I'm upset, but because at a certain point they give up on you. I just feel like at a certain point they give up on you because you're not you're not developing your following at the rate that they want, and so they then
but it's also like incentivizing something like, and this is not about Matt Taibbi or what he does, but part of the reason, Matt Taibbi has grown into like this sort of like really big figure that he has is because he's like controversial, right? He's speaking out about really controversial topics. It's causing a lot of like backlash, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. But then what does that do? It's like this model is incentivizing fighting and controversy. And it's like, that's what other people are doing. Other people are trying to make their names by fighting and causing controversy. And like that, again, that goes along, that's a part of performing. That's a performance.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm not sorry, this is not about like Matt Taibbi or blaming him or anything. Like, he is who he is. He does what he is. That's beside the point. My broader point is like, other people who might want to go into journalism are looking at this and probably thinking, okay, I need to get on Twitter and just like start fights. And like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, again, like, it's a wasted time going into performing rather than doing journalism.
Well, I'm actually glad that you say that, because I'm curious what you think about this. And I cannot help but use as an example Glenn Greenwald's newsletter that he has set up. And I'm a little bit bothered by the fact that it's so focused on pointing out hypocrisy to the point that I feel like it's almost reinforcing those things that we don't want to be the status quo in the world. So like, for example, if he says, we need to like not, so a recent example was what he did with, at his newsletter, he did this coverage of, let me pull it up here. And I think Glenn's, fighting the good fight in many respects, but okay. He goes, as anger toward Belarus mounts, recall the 2013 forced landing of Bolivia's plane to find Snowden. And then he talks about, while it's illegal, it's not unprecedented. The dangerous tactic was pioneered by the same U.S. and EU officials, now righteously condemning it. And then there was something else that I saw a while ago. And anyways, the thing that I'm concerned about here is that it's not that it's wrong for people to be outraged when something like that happens. It's that people are not also outraged when it happens to like when the US does it, right? Like that's the issue. And but he also did this thing recently where he was defending people at the Daily Caller. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't.
Were these couple journalists, because they were attacked, and it is hilarious. There is this great clip of Robert Mackey talking about this that I could cue up at the end here if we wanted some comic relief. But my point being was, like, he says everyone on the left is always focused on what could happen to people in terms of violence or the attacks on them and like the microaggressions because they're persons of color. And yet Robert Mackey and people at Intercept singled out these two Latino reporters who are going on the ground for the Daily Caller and covering Antifa as they are engaged in property damage. And see, my problem with that is that's such a stretch. Like, if I'm supposed to be concerned about, I think you're taking it in the wrong direction. It has to be backward. I mean, I just think like maybe I'm not that worked up about the identity politics that the Intercept is trying to get me to buy into. You know what I mean? Like maybe they're overstating its significance. I'm not here to subscribe to, well, in that case, I can't attack conservative reporters because they've got Latinos or Asians or black men that are trying to further conservative agendas for right-wing billionaires. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't seem like that's the way to play it. So my problem here is that this genre of reporting, which really works on a Substack platform, of pointing out the hypocrisy, and seemingly, in my view, some of what I'm reading almost reinforces, I don't know if I'm being specific enough in making my argument, but I'm giving it a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. But when you read what is being written, it just seems like it reinforces those very systems that you seem like you want to dismantle. Like you seem like you want to tear
but then
those down.
why would you use that same logic?
That's my point.
In a different way. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So you take the left wing narrative. We deal a lot with narratives on this show. So you take the left wing narrative, and then let's call it the liberal narrative. You take the liberal narrative, and it's clear that there's nothing valid about it. But then you map it onto what's happening in the conservative space, and you say, well, don't they have a point if you're going to go on talking about this as liberals?
Yeah, I don't see the point of that either. That's silly.
But then your audience responds to it because you're able to get them outraged that this is going on.
I hear you. No, I mean, there's that. And like, why would you reinforce that paradigm to protect the right? Like, it's kind of doesn't really make sense. I haven't been paying so much attention. Like, I don't know. I'm not really into the Substacks. I got to say, like, I know everyone has one.
I'm done with it.
No, I know everyone has one, but I haven't really been following. Like I get a lot of newsletters, but I don't really ever read them. It's just not my style. So I don't really know like what's being written and what's not being written. I just know that I think that by like showing that you can only be successful if you do it this way on these platforms, it's just incentivizing what I think is actually damaging to journalism in the long run, which is stirring up controversy, starting fights, and trying to be like a personal brand that can entertain everyone. And I'm not like saying that because that's what Glenn and Matt are doing. What works for them, but it's like, it almost feels like that's the only way to make it. And if that's the only way to like make a living, is to produce your own content and like perform and like entertain everyone, then that really limits who gets to be a journalist. Yeah.
Well, and as you're seeing, I see what you're doing with Breakthrough News. You recognize that live streams really do help keep you out there and help like propel the other work that you're doing, like the videos that you're posting, those amazing. So I guess that adds to like the hustle. It's the kind of stuff that like you have to do. Like, oh, you can't just produce the report. Oh, you can't just go cut a video. Then you have to do a live stream and you have to like be talking about what's like. It's almost like there's. Go ahead.
So it's also the way that your algorithms reward you is like your YouTube page grows if you are constantly doing live streams. Now we at Breakthrough News, we didn't. So I actually want to mention a couple of things here because I think I have some interesting perspective after moving from Soapbox to Breakthrough, and obviously the content I'm producing has changed quite dramatically between those two platforms. But we didn't do live streams every day because we were like, oh, we want to grow. It was because we didn't feel like anyone on the left was really covering Gaza like it should. And we have the infrastructure to do it. Why not? This is one of those moments when you should be putting, that's why we exist as a media organization, right? To like help the left, help movements, help inform. And so this is the right time to go into overdrive and let's do a live stream every day and let's get actual like Palestinian voices on it. Because the other things I was noticing was like Palestinians almost never get to speak from their own experiences. Part of it is because it was really hard to reach people in Gaza because Israel was like bombing the telecommunications infrastructure, which was deliberate so that you can't hear their voices. But also there's something about Americans where we just like really like to hear about what's happening to people in other places from Americans and white people particularly. Like, I don't know what it is. I really don't get it. I do get it. It's like this kind of implicit bias. Like you can't help it. It's kind of like how Americans have an implicit bias towards people with British accents. Like we can all, I can admit, like when I hear someone with a British accent, I kind of automatically in a conditioned way view them as smart, even if what they're saying is utter nonsense. And it's a very particular British accent. It's like the upper class one. And I think that's why there's this dynamic where Americans are like, oh, that's an American accent and that person's a white person. So I think what they're saying about Palestine is really interesting. So we're trying to give like a platform to Palestine, not just to Palestinians. I mean, I spoke to some Israeli leftist journalists that we never get to hear from in the US media, which I was really excited to get to do. But the point is, I was really happy we were able to provide that. But of course, what we noticed is like when you do live streams, YouTube rewards you. Like, yep. And the longer you do, that's the other thing, the longer you do the live stream, the bigger your numbers get. So it's a system that rewards you for being live for like several hours. That's how you grow your YouTube page. And it's so that, and in a way, also the algorithm is skewed in a way that encourages performance. That said, I do want to speak to the fact that like I came out of Soapbox, which isn't, they don't like, they always specify like, we're not news. And I really appreciated getting to work there for the time that I did. I learned a lot about like video and how to make it and how to be on camera. Like I didn't know any of that before I started working at Soapbox. That said, Soapbox became more geared towards the sort of micro content of more entertainment, right? Like entertainment media mixed with news. So like TikToks and like these short videos for Instagram and these like shorter and shorter segments. And whereas with Breakthrough, I get to do these like hour-long interviews with people who are on the ground or with academics or with like actual experts where I can go really in depth and deep dive. And I love that I'm getting to do that. But of course, you notice the views are different, right? The views for the short, easy content like is tens of thousands. Whereas the views for like the longer in-depth stuff that really explains to you the what and the why and the how, as our good friend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went into when she was talking about Israel, obvious, the who, the what, and the how. But that longer content, it's like there's just not, it's harder to get that out there because it's not as entertaining, but it's way more informative. But you know, I don't care. Like I'd rather have thousands of fewer views and be able to really go in depth in like a substantive way than have millions of views and just be making 1-minute videos. But like that aspect of the media and the way it's moving also shows you that like that's another broader problem in the media sphere is shorter attention spans. Like people, especially younger people, they want to know what's happening in 1 minute or less. And if it's longer than that, they won't watch. And that's really sad. And that's also like a really bad trend.
And good luck explaining some of these things. I mean, how do you explain a 70 to 80 year occupation and give them any?
I mean, you can. It's just it's missing a lot of detail. It's missing a lot of detail.
Like
the short explanation.
And then for me, it's like how do I talk to people about the complexity? I mean, it's not that complex, really. I can boil it down to simple terms, but also like, how do I explain to people what's going on with, let's say, the Espionage Act and whistleblowers and stuff like that in less than a minute? Like, how do you even begin to give people like a sense about any of that? Anyways, we got some people following along. We'll wrap here in the next 10 or so minutes, but we got some people following along.
Does anybody have any questions? Or
actually,
oh, okay, cool.
I have a couple I was going to put to you.
Awesome.
There's just one, and then let's check in with the brunch crowd to wrap our show. I have another fun clip here. But first, let's just get to what some of the people are saying. Well, Connie says you're amazing, and she's really excited that she didn't have to watch any cable over the last 2 weeks.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
I mean, I think that like it's true that you were filling a gap. This is what independent media is supposed to do, or actually, I'm not sure if it's supposed to do because it's not really like great that corporate media is so bad that we have to do this, perform this responsibility, because you'd think that like those other journalists would do those things that we're doing. But that being said, I do well when the corporate media fails, right? Like the Assange trial coverage is good because everyone decided to like pretend like it's not going on, or like your stuff does well because they're not going to pick up on the things that need to be shared. Like maybe I know what it is. for the corporate media in this last month, if I had to diagnose the problem, it's that they're so focused on, and this is you want to talk about checking in with the brunch crowd, the quiet diplomacy of Joe Biden, who's just not signaling anything, just behind the scenes. He's working on the crisis, but he's not telling anybody how he feels. Isn't it amazing that like his whole administration isn't getting into flame wars on social media with people? They're not, they're not spreading Hezbollah but they're also not going to take the chance that they look like Hamas sympathizers. They really know how to walk a fine line here. This is what Jake Tapper and others at CNN like did a whole thing celebrating the fact like people are being bombed and they're not saying shit about it.
Like, this is just Joe Biden. I mean, he sent Hadi Amr, who's like this half Palestinian Arab American diplomat, to go deal with the Israelis. Like, that's what you do when you don't want to do anything. The Israelis, first of all, are racist. They're not going to listen to an Arab. If you're going to send someone to go talk to Israel about ending a bombing campaign, you have to send somebody that they respect, not somebody that they're going to be racist against, who has like no actual ties to anyone in Israeli leadership. But also, I think what happened here is the Biden administration, like a lot of the Western officials, looked at Palestine, looked at the Arab Spring of the last 10 years, the Arab Spring and the wars that came out of it from the last 10 years and saw, in 2014, Gaza was bombed and most people in other countries in the region were too distracted by local existential crises to really pay attention. There was the threat of ISIS. ISIS had swept through Mosul. And there was like these, Syrian, or not even just Syrian, these like foreign fighter rebels, moderate rebels that America was arming across Syria, who actually turned into ISIS or were like, clones of ISIS, that were trying to collapse the Syrian state. Lebanon was also dealing with a fight at its border with these same jihadist groups like al-Nusra. And so the region was really fractured also by sectarianism at the time. So I think that the last 10 years were sort of this detour for the region where Palestine didn't seem like it was so central anymore. And as on top of that, Palestinians seemed so pacified. I think that the US administration, as well as the Europeans, were kind of looking at the situation, which they know is apartheid. They're not stupid. And there's like permanent occupation, and thinking Israel has a lid on it. They've got it under control. This is just the permanent status quo. Palestinians aren't fighting back. End of story. And so I think that this moment took everyone by surprise. These provocations by the Israelis in Jerusalem, and then the Palestinian response, the Palestinian resistance to that, which included Hamas firing rockets, but as well as Palestinians protesting across the West Bank. And for the first time in decades, Palestinians erupting in anger and protest all across Israel inside 48 Palestine. And so I think this took everyone really by surprise. And the media also is a part of the establishment, the corporate media, and had the same mentality of this is just the status quo. This is, the occupation in West Bank is never going to end. Like, this is just a permanent conflict, however they see it in their stupid, weird lens of like, it's a conflict and not settler colonialism. But in their minds, it's just a permanent conflict. But Israel has a handle on it. And so I think this took everyone by surprise. And that's why you saw and we've seen since Biden became president, this kind of bending over backwards by the anti-Trump media, resistance types like Jake Tapper, who want to explain everything he's doing as if he's playing some mastermind chess game. When really, he has no policy. On Israel-Palestine, his policy is really, it's just the same policy. Nothing different, nothing's changed. Literally just the same direction. Israel gets what it wants. Maybe we say some words that are slightly critical, but that's it.
Yeah. So we have a quick question here. It's from Mohammed, who asks about the Palestinian general strike on May 18th and the mass arrests of Palestinians by Israeli police. And I'll finish what he had to say, but I do think this was the strength of what Breakthrough News was doing and the failing of corporate media is that we get to see this resistance happening, and it's connected to the larger violence, right? Like it's not like the war isn't happening in a vacuum. It also can be said that people are being bombed because they are resisting the Israeli government, right? Like then this is like a terror campaign to get them to stop.
To submit, to get them to submit.
To submit,
yeah.
Right. So he says, I think this is important because the media has been mostly covering the conflict in Gaza and neglected what's happening in the 48 Palestine and the West Bank. Right. So if you're just focused on the bombs that are falling in Gaza, then you don't pay any attention to what's happening in the West Bank and Jerusalem. You're not making the larger connections.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I was really happy we got to do. Like, we got to speak to Palestinians inside of 48 Palestine who were dealing with these like Israeli lynch mobs trying to like find Arabs to hunt down and attack, and to speak to that issue, and also the unprecedented protests inside of Israel by Palestinian citizens and what was fueling that. And then we also talked to people in Jerusalem. We talked to people across the West Bank. And yeah, it wasn't just a fight with Gaza. And one thing that I thought was great too is like the media was trying to push this idea that Palestinians in Jerusalem were like angry that, and Palestinians in the West Bank and other Palestinians outside of Gaza were angry that Hamas got involved and fired rockets. And this, you know, tarnished the image of their legitimate nonviolent protests in Jerusalem. And that just wasn't the case. Like, yeah, there was some Palestinians who did feel that way because they're a part of different political factions. Palestinians have different political factions. Hamas is not the only one. And they're against each other. Like the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah runs Palestinian Authority, and Hamas are on opposite sides. So yeah, Fatah was upset. But that doesn't mean that people in Jerusalem were upset. People in Sheikh Jarrah were like cheering and then also people around the region were like, holy shit, they're hitting Tel Aviv. That's never happened. And like, you're not allowed to express that on American corporate media. And we had people on who expressed that because, you know, you want to know how people across the region are viewing this and seeing this. And so I was really happy that we got to give voice to that and really got to like give a more realistic portrayal of the way the region was reacting to this fight. Yeah,
that's good. And then one more question and then we will wind down this show. A light-hearted question. What's your favorite Lebanese food? Someone wants to know what kind of cuisine you're into.
Okay, so I'm not that exciting. But I could like literally live off of Lebanese hummus and tabbouleh and fattoush,
which is for the American untrained tongue.
Tabbouleh is like a salad with made of the like instead of lettuce you use parsley. It's mostly parsley and like very small cut up parsley and small cut up like very tiny like little cube tomatoes. And onions and this like really lemony zesty kind of sauce that I don't know how to describe, but it's so good. And I can't think of like the English word for it, but it's really good. Fattoush is like a different kind of salad that has like a more sour taste that is with regular, like with like lettuce. And also has like pomegranate juice in it and like has like pieces of like toasted or baked or sometimes fried pita bread, but like cut up small. That's really delicious. And then hummus. I mean, everyone knows what hummus is, but as I say it, like an Arab. And then I love Lebanese like this. It's like this drained, like condensed yogurt, but it's like super sour and delicious. And I could just like, I eat it without bread. Like I just eat it in spoonfuls. It's not the most exciting. It's like, these are like the most basic things in Lebanon, but like I could live off of them. And then of course, like kebabs are really good, but those aren't really Lebanese. Kebabs are like regional. In fact, my favorite kind of kebabs are like Iranian style, like Persian style kebabs. Anyways.
That's nice.
That's what I eat. Sorry if you were expecting like a more gourmet answer.
No, David thanks you and said Lebanese food is so delicious, so many incredible dishes and an amazing food culture. So,
ooh, now I'm getting hungry because it's like almost dinner time for me. I also really like grape leaves, which is just like grape leaves with this like really yummy lemony like sauce on the outside and then like it's like wrapped around rice. So good. I'm gonna have some of that tonight.
Yeah, we're right around mealtime for both of us, just because of the time zone difference. So it's about lunch. It's dinner. dinner for you. So let me squeeze in one thing for a minute here, and then we'll wrap with this brunch video I have for us, a little comic relief that we like to do here. But I did want to mention, because I like him so much. He's such an inspirational person to me. I did want to mention to everyone, to make sure others saw, that Daniel Ellsberg is still leaking. He's still blowing the whistle. He's 90 years old, but I don't know if you saw this, Rania, but I'll give you a chance to catch up to this. So, and you might find this very interesting given what's going on with the ratcheting up of tensions with China. So I'm just going to put him on screen here. Here we go. So this is, and I'm not necessarily endorsing this source. It's just there so that I can put this image of Daniel Ellsberg up on our screen. So Dan, he released this document that he kept when he took the Pentagon Papers. And it exposes that American military leaders pushed for a first-use nuclear strike on China, accepting the risk that the Soviet Union would retaliate in kind on behalf of its ally and millions of people would die, according to dozens of pages from a classified 1966 study of the confrontation. This government, our U.S. government, censored those pages recently when it declassified the study for public release. The document was disclosed. This was in the New York Times. The document was disclosed by Daniel Ellsberg, and he said he had copied the top secret study about the Taiwan Strait crisis, of which I'm not familiar, so I won't try to speak about it at length here. But at the same, but he did not disclose it back then around the Pentagon Papers. He's now highlighting it amid new tensions between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. The pages that the government censored in the official release of the study described the attitude of a general named Lawrence S. Cooter, the top Air Force commander for the Pacific. He wanted authorization for a first-use nuclear attack on mainland China at the start of any armed conflict. To that end, he praised a plan that would start by dropping atomic bombs on Chinese airfields, but not other targets, arguing that its relative restraint would make it harder for skeptics of nuclear warfare and the American government to block the plan. And there would be merit in a proposal from the military to limit the war geographically to the air bases, the general said, and continued, if that proposal would forestall some misguided humanitarian's intention to limit a war to obsolete iron bombs and hot lead. I mean, it's incredible.
That's talking really about horrifying.
Like, we're talking about nuclear war, and he says, we got to get ahead of some humanitarian who might try to limit what we could do. So he released this. And not only did he release this, I mean, he's 90 years old. So he released.
And if I ever make it to 90, I'm going to be like just chilling. I'm definitely not going to be working.
Okay. He released this. And I want to tell you that he also framed the reason he was releasing it as a dare to the U.S. government to come after and prosecute him under the Espionage Act, because he's such a supporter of Julian Assange and other whistleblowers. And he said, I want to be a test case. I want them to come after me for releasing this document that's still classified. And by the way, classified after like 60 years, like almost, pretty nearly, over 50 years. Over 50 years, still classified, which says how absurd our system is. But and he said, I dare you to prosecute me. I want to be a test case so I can show that the Espionage Act is unconstitutional, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, I have to share that because I like Daniel so much, and he's an amazing person. And the fact that he's still speaking out on all of this is amazing. So, all right, let's close with our and also you got to get to your dinner. So let's close with, I am going to share the screen here, and we're going to do, this is us checking in with the brunch crowd every week. I don't know if those who are following know exactly what we're doing. But basically we do this so we can see what the West Wing crowd, so to speak, people who, and they have so many good speeches. They love their words. They really do think that they're the best. And I don't have a lot, but we'll just okay. So here we go. You can. I'll read the first one. All Whether right. on foreign or domestic policy, White House.
Wait, I can't see it.
You can't see it? It's right here.
Yeah, shouldn't I be able to see it? Like, shouldn't it be on the screen?
It is on the screen.
Oh, now it is. Okay, that was weird. It was just me and you. Okay, cool. I see it now.
Huh. That's odd. Okay. Well, here's this one. So let me just read it and then.
Yeah, start over.
All right, here we go. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Whether on foreign or domestic policy, the White House, to a degree rarely seen in recent administrations, remains calm, cordial, and firm. That often is the task for White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who deals with ridiculous questions with smile and precision.
We are seeing a rapid erosion of international norms that is making the world a more chaotic and dangerous place. Lukashenko must pay such a high price for this air piracy that it'll give pause to other tyrants. Max Boot.
Today, stand in your truth. Do the brave thing. It doesn't have to be compared to this. This is Maria Shriver. Just ask yourself, what brave thing can I do today? Do it and see how you feel. One small act is how we all begin. Hashtag Liz Cheney.
Oh my God. So pathetic. So pathetic. Can anyone remember the name of the Russian prime minister? I sometimes forget. From afar, seems like a pretty invisible PM. Tell me if I'm wrong. I could be. I don't follow Russian governmental politics too closely these days. Pretty boring subject. Michael McFaul. And I'm pretty sure he's a former U.S. ambassador to Russia.
Yeah, he is. His dripping liberal sarcasm, more than obnoxious. All right, Edward Isaac DeVere. I told Biden that the title of the book would be Battle for the Soul. The difference between you and me, pal, Biden said, is I actually believe it. No, Edward replied. Let me go back. I stepped on that. This truly is like a West Wing line. All right. No, I replied. I think you may have been onto something. That really does seem like a Sorkin quote.
These tweets are getting so long. You got to give more time before the West Wing opening comes on.
Yeah. I'll do a better job with production next time. I was a little rushed in putting that together this time. But anyways, it was great to be here with you all live. Let me just quick last minute make sure that we're not leaving anybody hanging who had anything important for us. I'm going to pull up this Rockfin. But yeah, in the meantime, I mean, I'll just say thank you for supporting our work. Rania's doing great things with Breakthrough News. I'm working on getting my newsletter off the ground and expanding it to support actual journalism rather than just writing. I mean, the one point I didn't make, we can go into larger detail another time, maybe with if we have someone on like Jordan Cheriton or anybody else on the left who deals with this. But what I've noticed also is there is such this like competition from writing against what we do. I don't know if you realize this, Rania, but like there's this whole mill of writing that isn't journalism, but it's monetized greatly and extensively. And it's things like, like if I could get really ridiculous, I truly do mean it's things like how to meditate and stay your best self while the pandemic is getting worse and worse. And
your best self.
Yeah, like it's that kind of stuff. And they really do want that to be a part of their model. Like they really do believe that should be a big part of what they do.
Yeah.
So Ronnie checked in. Ronnie's a great supporter. Ronnie had COVID real bad earlier on last year, and he had checked in with and he checked in with us. but he donated again on our Rockfin. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ronnie.
And I think he's in the UK. So, and actually, that's a good point to end on. The UK is where we've been seeing the shutdowns of like Elbit, right?
Yeah,
like
that's been pretty awesome and really inspiring. Yeah. And I hope those activists keep it up. That's like one of the most consequential things you can do is shut down an Israeli weapons factory.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll be back soon with another show. Until then, thank you all, and we'll see you around.